Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning back into the channel. My name is Max, and today we're going to be going over some of the craziest things I captured in the last year of storm chasing. We're going to be going over the prolific December 10th outbreak as we're approaching the 1-year anniversary. We're also going to be going over the 2022 storm chasing season. Now, I took off 3 months this year and went all out. I chased just about every single setup, saw numerous tornadoes, went down to the Florida Keys, saw water spouts. A few months after that, we had Hurricane Ian, which was a Category 4 in Florida. And also sprinkled in there were some new things that I've never done, like going to Iceland for a volcano or creating a severe thunderstorm inside a laboratory. I have so much cool footage to show you guys. I'm really excited to get started because a lot of it hasn't been shown on the channel yet. But before we get into any of that, of course, we have to start with the December 10th tornado outbreak as we're approaching the 1-year anniversary. So it's been almost exactly a year since December 10th, and I figured we could go through and kind of retrace my steps from that day because it's kind of an interesting story. I really did not plan on chasing December 10th. The night before, I was like, no, not the event for me. I'm just gonna go to work tomorrow. And when I woke up the next morning, my attitude changed a little bit. And I said, well, this actually might be something worth looking into. I thought there was a decent chance for some prefrontal supercells somewhere out here in the warm sector. I just wasn't sure exactly where. I decided, okay, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put my camera in my car and my tripod in my car and go to work. And then if at noon, once I'm all wrapped up with everything, if it's still trending, if it's trending up for a heightened severe weather event, then I'll go. And that's pretty much what happened. And one funny thing, I forgot to put an SD card in my camera, and I didn't realize that until I was about 3 hours into my drive, and I knew I didn't have time to stop. So I was frantically driving and trying to look through my cup holders and my center console, and I got really lucky and found an SD card that was at the bottom of all the stuff that I have in there. So that kind of saved the day because I was so last minute to this chase that that could have completely screwed up the entire day. So what I decided to do is I left from Oklahoma City, and instead of taking Interstate 40 east, I took 44. I kind of wanted to split the difference here. I thought there was a chance something might develop out here in the open warm sector. There was a kind of a shortwave trough that was pushing in from Texas and looked like it had the potential to initiate something somewhere in here, but I was also not counting out the Missouri play further north, closer to the front, where it still looked like there'd be some semi-discrete supercells and tornadoes. So I was kind of splitting the difference. I got to Joplin, Springfield, and then took the highway that kind of meanders through the hills and trees here. And as that's happening, as I'm probably somewhere east of Springfield, is when the storm initiates southwest of Little Rock that would eventually become the quad state supercell. And it's making its way towards Little Rock. It's very clearly elevated, but I'm keeping a close eye on that because I'm kind of almost due north of it, and it's moving up. And I'm kind of wondering okay, if this becomes something, would I be able to get in front of it? And meanwhile, as I'm getting east here, storms are starting to initiate back to my northwest. So I'm watching those as well. And I'm kind of just meandering my way down through here. And I would say I was probably somewhere northeast of Poplar Bluff here when the storm started first producing tornadoes, first going tornado warn, and that's when I'm like, okay, am I going to be able to make it from up here to down here in time for this storm to cross without it being super sketchy and having to core punch right as the thing's about to cross the interstate here on I-55. And as I get to, probably when I'm in Poplar Bluff is when the tornado is approaching Jonesboro, and we start getting our first pictures on social media. There was that picture of the dual tornadoes, and I'm seeing that as I'm racing out of town here. And once you get southeast of Poplar Bluff, it's basically just country farm roads. And I was doing a lot of zigzagging, stair-stepping my way southeast, and just trying my best to get in front of this thing before it crossed, because the problem here is there's a river, there's a giant river, and there's only so many river crossings, and the main one that I would need to get in front of it if I were to miss that, intercept when it crossed 55 would be 155 here, which goes southeast and then back up, and there would have probably been damage through here. So I was like, oh, if I don't get it before it crosses 55 here, I'm not gonna see this thing. So I'm on these back roads here, just zigzagging my way down, and I post a picture to social media, and I'm somewhere around here. I'm somewhere in this general vicinity when the tornado is in Leachville. You can see that hook on the radar screenshot. It's right there in Leachville. It's doing damage to the northwest side of town there. I think that's where the Dollar General was, if I'm not mistaken. I went back through this path after the fact and saw all the damage like to the nursing home and Monette there. But anyways, I end up getting to the highway that goes into Hayti. And about that time, I'm realizing, okay, I'm going to beat this thing to the interstate. I'm going to make it there and I'm going to be able to get a view of this thing if it's still on the ground. So I come in on State Highway 84 into Hayti. I get on 55 here and I only go a couple miles south. I go to this exit right here. It's State Highway J. And I sit right here. It's still raining. You can see the lightning flashing off to my southwest. If we zoom out and go down here, the tornado has now probably crossed into Missouri and is somewhere in this general vicinity as I'm sitting there looking off to my southwest to see if I can see it. So I'm here, tornado's probably about here. And I believe this is when it is hitting those high tension power lines, those big power lines that ended up all collapsing over and falling over. I remember seeing those as well. And it's making its way northeast as it's southwest of Braggadocio here, probably right about here as it's debarking these trees is when I start to get a view of it. And it's just this big, tall stovepipe off in the distance. But there was so much lightning, it's like I never lost sight of it. Once I got a view of it, it just kept on coming to me and I never had a moment where I was like, wait, where is it? Is it off over there? Is it off over there? Just continuous flickering lightning. And I was able to track it right up to me as it's just southwest of Braggadocio here. I can start to see that the tornado is going to move to my north because it's constantly moving right. I'm constantly having to shift my camera frame to the right. So I know it's going to pass north of me. I'm just not sure exactly how far. And as the tornado approaches Braggadocio here, I'm looking on the horizon. I can see the lights of town. I can see the tornado and I'm like, oh man, whatever little community this is about to take a direct hit. And as it's coming in through the south side of town here, you start seeing all the power flashes popping. And as it gets to State Highway J is when it does its worst damage, unfortunately to a small home, housing a family with 3 little girls, one of which unfortunately passed away. And thanks to everybody who watched the videos, we were able to donate quite a bit of money to the Rackley family as well as numerous other organizations in Kentucky. So thank you all so much for helping out in that aspect. As it's crossing State Highway J, I'm packing up, I'm in the car, I'm frantically trying to get back on the interstate to creep in behind this thing, and it has gone from a tall stovepipe to a fat wedge, and it's just right off here, just tearing up this field. After the fact, we got the drone out and you can see all the spiral marks in the field. Just truly violent tornado, and I come in on it on 55 here, crosses probably about a half mile in front of me, and then moves off to the northeast. Now, this is when I come across the semis that are down, kind of pause, see what's going on with them. The tornado's moving off into the distance, and I get my final shot of the tornado as it's crossing the Mississippi River here. And you can see the lights of both of these towns here illuminating the tornado and just seeing the violent motion at night like that. Just never seen anything like it. So the tornado crosses the river here and goes into Tennessee. And that's pretty much when I lose it. After the whole semi incident, I come into this interchange here and go east on 155 and I run into debris here. There was stuff laying in the road, whatever this metal building system was. I ran over and popped all my tires. And thankfully another storm chaser, Brandon Clement, was able to pick me up. That was my crazy intercept with the first EF4 tornado of this massive outbreak. Obviously, this event is most well known for the second EF4 that went through Kentucky and hit numerous towns, but this was my experience with the December 10th tornado outbreak. Now, as the dust started to settle from the December 10th event and we got into 2022, it was time to start making preparations for chase season. So here we were, the beginning of storm chase season 2022, and it started off with a bang. And by bang, I mean I absolutely missed one of the best tornadoes of the year. I was down in Orlando for a work conference in late February, early March, and completely missed out on the Winterset event, which was probably one of the tornadoes of the year. I was driving home the day that it happened, Very frustrating, but I decided to say, hey, let's try and make the most out of this because the following day featured a setup in Arkansas, and I was going to be going through Arkansas to get home. So I ended up chasing and saw a tornado north of Russellville, so that was a nice score to get at least something to start the year off, but definitely hurt missing that big winter set tornado that a lot of my friends got. My next chase featured yet another failure. March 21st was a big tornado outbreak in south central Texas, and somehow managed to miss every single tornado on that day. Left storms right before they produced, got on storms right after they produced, so on and so forth. Just a frustrating day, but the next day featured a moderate risk in Mississippi. We ended up seeing a tornado on this day. It was kind of weird. It was like I was really not doing well on the big days where I missed them entirely because of work, but then the following day I would get some random weird obscure tornado. So that was kind of strange, but that's okay. It is time to get into April. My luck turned around when we got to April 11th and 12th. This featured 2 days of tornadoes. The 11th was a supercell in west central Arkansas that produced multiple tornadoes, and it just happened to be in the area of west central Arkansas that actually has pretty decent terrain. The following day we made our way up to Iowa and saw multiple photogenic tornadoes. Of course there was the Palmer tornado that a lot of people got, very nice, very photogenic. And then after that, I kind of led us a different route than most storm chasers did, and we kind of ended up in the core north of the main circulation while a lot of other chasers were further south. And this actually put us in prime position for a tornado that almost nobody saw. I think I've seen 2 other videos of the tornado, but they were kind of on the west side looking east, obscured by rain. It is very rare this day and age to get a tornado this photogenic, close range, completely to yourself. So that was a real treat. This is probably my favorite singular tornado of 2022. The remainder of April featured some nice storms. We got some good structured supercells in Kansas, but it wasn't until April 29th that we had another true tornado setup on our hands. Now this day seemed like it was going to be a major outbreak, and in some sense it was, but the initial storms really struggled, and we finally got on one that looked like it was ready to produce a tornado. It had a little nipple funnel, which then we saw ground circulation for. We're like, okay, here we go, it's about to get started. But this tornado quickly died, and the storm seemed to have trouble getting organized. It would try to wrap up an area, and then it would get kind of diffused. So we're like, okay, we might need to start thinking about heading south. So eventually that's what we did. As we were heading south towards the storm that would eventually become the Andover storm, the line that was coming in actually produced some weird little hybrid tornadoes that we saw, not from as close range as I would have liked. We were kind of far away, and then we ended up bailing on going down to the Andover storm because it was starting to get dark, and we had all met in Salina and piled in my car. So everybody else's car was back in Salina. So we didn't want to get in too late. We headed back up to Salina and missed the nighttime tornadoes that happened near El Dorado after the Andover storm started moving east. But Aaron and I decided to stay in Andover while the other guys went back home to Oklahoma City. We stayed there and documented some of the damage the following morning since we knew this was probably going to be one of the most significant tornadoes of the year. We didn't have to wait long for another tornado setup. May 4th featured a large moderate risk from the Texas Panhandle all the way through central Oklahoma. We had an interesting decision to make on this day because the most obvious play was to go to the South Texas Panhandle where the HRRR had just been pinging a massive supercell run after run for like 12 hours. But we decided we wanted to stay in Oklahoma. We wanted to play kind of the secondary target that not a lot of people were playing because we figured this would give us less clustered roads, and we thought the potential was there for a significant tornado. The wind fields looked much more impressive out east. We got on this massive tornado-warned supercell near Seminole, Oklahoma. This had one of the just most giant rotating mesocyclone tornado cyclones that I've ever seen that really never fully planted. It was just ripping, but just for some reason was not able to condense. Regardless of that, the storm was still very impactful. It went right through downtown Seminole, causing EF2 damage to a large portion of town. Even though the full tornado cyclone wasn't completely condensed, there were a lot of these little intermittent vortices plus tornadic winds kind of all around town, so there was damage everywhere. The storm went on to produce more tornadoes to the east, in fact one of which looked probably like it was pretty strong to violent there for a little bit. But after that it got dark and all the remaining tornadoes just were kind of shrouded in rain and really couldn't be seen too well with the terrain in eastern Oklahoma there. On May 15th, we were back in east central Oklahoma, very close to where we had seen those tornadoes on May 4th. This day did not necessarily look like a tornado day though. It looked like a structure and hail chase, which was fine by me since it was right in the backyard. We caught this insanely close lightning bolt that hit a tree, and we were actually able to go back after the fact and check it out. The evening faded out with a stunning Mamatis display, and we waited for the next legit setup. May 23rd was also another day that didn't really look that great. It seemed like there would be supercells in the western Texas panhandle, but the forecast photographs were not terribly impressive, and it seemed like these storms might have trouble remaining discrete after about 0Z. There was an outflow boundary from some earlier convection that was kind of racing to the west-northwest, and I sort of thought this was going to kill the storm. I really wasn't sure that this was actually going to be able to wrap this thing up into a tornado producer, but I was completely wrong and actually caught a bit off guard as this thing quickly brought this storm from a high base supercell to a tornado-producing monster. I was totally out of position for the initial Morton tornado, but the storm kept on producing. It just was this big dust vacuum, and it was hard to see at times, but every once in a while a new tornado would drop down, and I finally got a really good intercept right before sunset. This was shot on a farm-to-market road looking south near Whiteface, Texas. Just a few minutes before, this was my view. I literally could not see anything. It was a really dangerous setup if you weren't very situationally aware and knew what you were doing. As May came to a close, I started my role as a guide with Extreme Tornado Tours. We were going to be basing out of Denver for the final 2 tours, which was awesome because that's my hometown, chasing in my backyard, areas that I've known for pretty much my whole entire chase career, 15 years. So it was awesome to be back. I made a whole video about my time as a guide and what it's like to be on a storm chasing tour. You should definitely check that out. We saw a lot of amazing supercells on tour, but the 2 most notable tornadoes were near Toma, Wisconsin. This was an EF2 on June 15th. It was kind of a rain wrap, but very large circulation. And then on the following tour, we got an absolutely spectacular supercell that produced a lot of tornadoes in north central Kansas on June 23rd. After the tours were over, we returned back down to Oklahoma City, and it was time for me to start my next adventure. Now, as the traditional tornado season started to wrap up, I set my sights on somewhere very far away from the Central Plains. Every few years, I make a trip down to the Florida Keys to chase waterspouts, and this year I was taking my longest trip yet. I was going to be there for about 10 days. Now, waterspout chasing is the absolute best because you're basically on vacation. You're in an area that's just absolutely beautiful. You're able to sit by the beach and just kind of leisurely watch cumulus clouds. I've made friends with people at the local National Weather Service down there, so every morning I just call them up and get their take on the forecast, and then I just kind of drive around looking for good cumulus. I managed to see quite a few waterspouts on this trip, including one at dusk, which was really neat. But the best one actually came on my very first day, and I only had to drive about a mile from my Airbnb to get a good shot of it. Alright, I'm gonna go get a better view. Beautiful. After the waterspout trip was over, I started my long drive home, but I had to do something else. If you've been with the channel for a while, you might remember a series I did a few years ago called Past Pursuits. The series revolves around storm chases from the 90s, and I go and I interviewed the chasers who were there, showcase their video, and kind of put together these episodes that go through the entire day from their perspective. I've been working on a season 2 for a while, but with COVID limitations, it's been kind of slow going. On this leg of my journey, I got to interview hurricane chasers Jim Eds and Rich Horodner. Now, Jim obviously has some of the most iconic hurricane footage ever, and Rich has been doing it since the 1960s. He goes way back with those like Jim Leonard, who were the OG hurricane chasers, so it was super cool to be able to talk to them. I also made my way up to Virginia to interview Roy Britt and the father of storm chasing, David Hoadley. Spending an afternoon with him was probably one of the most special moments I've had in a long time, and I really appreciated how kind and welcoming him and his wife were. Be sure to keep an eye out for Past Pursuits Season 2. I'm still running a bit behind schedule. I'm hoping to have the episodes done by sometime late winter or early spring of 2023. Now, with those interviews out of the way, it was time to make the long trek back to Oklahoma. Now, in August, we're usually thinking about hurricane season. That's kind of the primary focus. Once I start getting into August, that's kind of where all my attention goes to. But as we know now, August 2022 was not going to provide us with any tropical development whatsoever. Instead, me and a group of friends set our sights on something completely different, something that none of us had ever experienced. Last year when the volcanic eruption was going on in Iceland, I was unable to go, and I told myself if it ever happened again, I was absolutely doing anything I could to make my way out, and that's exactly what we did. When I caught wind there was a new vent opening up, I contacted my friends Michael and Aaron because I knew those were about the only two people I was going to be able to get to book a flight to Iceland on a whim. Upon landing, we were immediately met with disappointment because the volcano was closed due to bad weather, but thankfully the next day they started letting people back up again. And guys, let me tell you, if you ever get the chance to witness a volcanic eruption, please go. It is so mesmerizing. You will spend hours and hours just staring, tranquilized. You don't even have to talk or say anything. It's just one of the most surreal experiences a person can have with Mother Nature, and I highly recommend it. After getting back from Iceland, I was pretty much just waiting to see if we would have a hurricane this year. I had started working again, and I was kind of thinking that, we might just get this year off. But that obviously did not end up being the case, and we had Category 4 Hurricane Ian, which was just an absolute catastrophe, as we all know. I'm not going to talk too much about this one because I actually have a full documentary that I produced about this, and you can go up here somewhere where I'll put a link to it so you guys can go watch that, because the story that we captured, just everything that goes into that is pretty mind-blowing, and I highly recommend watching that over pretty much any of my other videos. The last thing I want to show you guys before we wrap up this video is this cool little montage I shot for a work project with a company called Adjuster TV. We went down to the Hague Engineering Building in Flower Mound, Texas. This is actually where Tim Marshall works, but this was a completely unrelated work project. We went there to kind of showcase everything that they had, as well as interview a lot of the people who work there, and I thought it was really cool because it's kind of like simulating a severe thunderstorm in a laboratory. They shoot ice balls at shingles, they have this giant wind tunnel. Pretty cool. I just never found a place for it in a video, so I thought I'd share it here.
My name is Corey Herchebes. I'm a lab technician at Hague Research and Testing. So this is our IBL-7. It's used to shoot 1/2-inch to 2-inch ice balls. It's latex band driven. The latex bands are pulled back into place and then launched. The ice ball will propel. It's laser sighted at the sample. This is Hague's IBL-9. We use it to shoot 2-inch to 4-inch ice. It uses compressed air to propel the ice ball out of the barrel. We have different barrels to fit in different ice ball sizes. It has a calibrated gauge that will measure the pressure once the correct pressure is achieved. We have our launch button that will propel the ice ball to impact. The main concept is it'll use compressed air. It does have an actuator with the butterfly valve connected to it, so that way when I hit the launch button, the butterfly valve will open, allowing all that compressed air to shoot down the barrel. That ice ball is right in front of it, so until it leaves the barrel, it's accelerating. Then once it leaves, it's at its velocity that will be for the impact. So 1/2 mv squared, we have our velocity, we have the mass of the ice ball, so we can calculate the energy. And that's the same concept for the IBL-7 as well. So nothing changes for that, and we'll measure every velocity for each impact and every kinetic energy for each impact.
I hope everybody has a great holiday season. Let's cross our fingers that as we get into these last few weeks of 2022, we can just go out nice and easy, not have any crazy weather events, and then in 2023, we'll be back here for more to capture whatever it is that comes our way. Thank you all so much for watching. Stay safe out there, and I'll catch you out there on the next one.